end of your 10 rows of rib. It's time to bring the rest of the work back into play. We need to join, actually, just like that, we need to join those two back together so we can go back to working in the round. So the main bulk of the hot water bottle cover that you've made will be on either spare needle or spare yarn. So to make sure you're joining it together in the correct way, put the work down on the table so as the front is facing you and the cast off stitches are at the back. Okay, the rib should be sat on your other needle with the working yarn coming off to the right and the needle point pointing to the right. And then, sorry, that's going to move around, but you need to remember it's kind of started in that position. Get your other needle with no stitches on it, and we're going to start from the left side of this work. We're going to start putting the stitches back onto the needle. Now, do not worry if they twist while you're doing this, because you can easily correct it as you go along. Untwist as you get to them. I think these are going on absolutely fine. Okay, and once they're all on, this next little bit is a tiny bit fiddly, but only for a round or two, and then it's back to lovely straight knitting with no messing about. No fiddly bits. Okay, so I've now got, this is looking more familiar, isn't it? I've now got the front load of stitches of my work back onto my double pointed needles, my circular needles. My cable is there, my flap is on the back needle, and I'm going to just simply carry on knitting as if this was all in the round. Bear with me because it will be a little bit tricky to start with, but as soon as you're underway, it'll be just as it has been. So just as normal, take your back needle out, the one with the flap on it, start knitting. Now to start with, whilst you're, sorry, I'm just trying to get the end out of the way there. Whilst you're joining things back together, I want you to give those first two stitches a really tight pull, really tight. I mean, not tight enough to break the yarn, but enough to give them a good old yank, because as you work along, that will keep that flat nice and neat and close at the seams, which is what you want to do. So I will get all the way to the other end and show you what I mean. Okay, so I'm at the end of the needle now. I've knit across all of those stitches. If I let go of the needle here, you can see that this side is kind of pretty well joined together, and we've now got to do the same down this end. So I'm just turning the work. This is the last time it's going to be tricky, because after this it's going to be joined, even though it might be a bit loose at the edges for a couple of rounds. Doesn't matter, it will tighten up. Okay, so if you look there, you will see that I'm now ready to knit across those stitches. Here we go then. So pull the back needle out just as before. I'm going to knit just as normal, and don't forget that first stitch. I'm going to pull that off. I'm going to give that a real good pull. Can you see what happens here when I do that? Let me do that again. Okay, it just brings that edge in nice and close. Do that with the first two stitches at least, and that will keep that nice and secure. It is not going to be secure straight away. It might take a couple of rounds, as I said. Right, so we're now working across the rib section, but we're not doing rib now. We're going back to working in normal knit, which is lovely. Let me just show you on the hot water bottle itself. So we have, I'm going to just undo that button. We have joined at the edge, and we're now coming back to work, just work along in our regular knit all the way along the top of that flap there. Really makes it sort of stand out as a feature of the hot water bottle cover. Now, as I work along, you are going to notice that the flap part is open at the side. Don't worry about that because we sew that all down at the end and make it like the envelope effect, you know, like on your pillowcase. We'll sew that down right at the end. The important thing here is to get your work back in the round and working nicely. Now, I have a tip here. It may confuse matters, it may not. My tip to get those edges nice and tight, nice and quick is as follows. If you look, I'm at the last 2 stitches and I've still, can you see that thread, that long thread there? I'm at the last 2 stitches on this needle, and rather than get to the end of them, what I'm going to do is pull this needle through so that those 2 stitches become part of this side of the work, and I'm only going to do that temporarily. Okay, so if you do this, if you take a couple of stitches off, you've got to remember that you've done it. Maybe put a stitch marker in, okay, because ultimately once things are nice and tight, you're going to want to put them back because you need to make sure that the stitches are where they should be. So if you look here, you can see on this front needle now, I've got 2 stitches that don't belong there, but I'm doing that because it will give me a really neat closure on the side. Still going to be pulling those stitches nice and tight. Okay, first 2, pull the first 4 stitches nice and tight on that needle, and it's going to close that gap up really nicely. Now, I've done that one side, I'm going to need to do it the other side when I get to the other end as well. It's quite tight there where I've pulled it. When I get to the end of the needle, I'll show you what I mean. Right, I am at the last 2 stitches of the front side of the work, and I'm going to do exactly the same at this end that I did at the other end. That is, I'm going to keep those 2 stitches there and just pull the needle and the cord through, and I'm going to borrow those 2 stitches and make them become part of the other needle that I'm working, purely and simply to close that gap quicker. Okay, so you can see now I've got 2 of the stitches from the front on the back, and it just, as I said, closes the gap nice and neatly. And so there, look there, you can see the big sort of stringy part. What I can do now is really control that. I can give that stitch that I've just made a good tug, tighten it right up, and the one after, good tug, and it's really closed that gap up. Okay, so I'm going to do a couple rounds of this, and then I'm going to show you what it looks like and put the stitches back where they belong. You do not have to do that. That's just a tip from me that I've found works for me in socks and all sorts, really, where I get into a bit of a pickle at the end of needles. Borrow your stitches, borrow a couple of stitches and put them back when it's all neat and closed. Okay, when you've done a couple more rounds and you're happy that that join is sort of nice and secure in there, and I'm happy, I think I've done 2 or 3 more rounds, I'm going to put my borrowed stitches back. You can see those 2 stitches do not belong there, they belong to the flap side. So all that's happened is I've got to the end of the flap on this side. Those 2 stitches need to be at the back, so I'm just going to pull my needle out to knit just as normal, but I'm just going to knit the first 2 stitches, give them a pull, and then I'm going to push the needle through, and those stitches have popped back where they belong. Okay, so they're now on the back side where they belong. So I've given back the 2 stitches that I borrowed from that side, and I'm now going to whiz along and do the same at the other end. So needles pulled out to knit just as before, and I will knit all the way along. It's really important, if you borrow the stitches, you've got to put them back because they need to be in the right place for shoulder shaping and things to work out nicely a little bit further down the line. You do not have to do this stitch borrowing. You do not have to do that. I've just found that it gives me a nice finish on joining that flap back into the round. And as soon as I get to the end, we'll have a look at what it looks like. Okay, so I'm now at the end, and this side of the work is 2 stitches down and this side is 2 stitches up. All right, so I've got 26 on this side and 30 over here, so I know I've got to get some back. If I show you the edge here, you'll see that 2, if you look, follow this line up, follow this line up where the green stitch is, follow it all the way, it should be sat on that stitch. It's not, it's sat over this side. So I've got 2 stitches to come back from the other side as well. Those 2 stitches that we borrowed earlier need to come back. Just exactly the same as before. I'm going to pull my needle out to knit. I'm going to knit the first 2, 1 and 2, pull them nice and tight, and I'm going to pull my needle through again, okay, and start this again. So now when I do my count, everything is even, everything is back where it should be. So I borrowed 2 stitches at each end of the flap just to get them onto another kind of more established needle full of knitting, if you like, and knitting across it as if they'd always sat there just closes that gap in a much neater way. So if I show you, that join is neat, it's not stretched or pulled. Can you see it's closed nicely? So it's a really good, I just think it's a really good way of closing that join. Right, I'm going to do a few more rows and I'm just going to show you how we're going to close the flap and make the envelope part work. Okay, so I've done a couple more rounds and I just want to show you how to kind of make the edge of this work. Okay, so it's nothing more complicated than getting a needle and threading the end. If you've left the end of the cast off edge long, all the better, because all you're going to do, turn your work sideways onto you. That flap, when you hold it down, is going to naturally fall just below where you started the rib, maybe a little bit, you know, just along that edge. So you know, you can't really get it wrong. Just let it naturally fall where it wants to sit, and hold those 2 edges together. And all I've done is nothing more technical really than like a whip stitch, but you can, if you want to, you can oh, I don't know if you saw any of that, you can do a mattress stitch. It doesn't need it really, it's hidden perfectly well, just to do a nice secure whip stitch down that little edge to close it down and turn it into a kind of envelope closing. Just hold that out of the way. Actually, let me just for now, I'm just going to poke the end through to the back of the work and we'll have a look. So there you can see that we've now made this envelope closure at that side of our practice hot water bottle. Okay, and I've done the same now on the other side. So both sides are closed and it is now that lovely envelope closing, which will keep your hot water bottle nice and secure. So we've made the opening, we've made the flap, we've joined it back together, we've turned it into an envelope opening. And if I turn it round to the front, it needs a bit of blocking, but you would never know that all of that was going on the back, would you? It now just, the front of it, the pattern and everything, it just continues on beautifully, as if nothing had ever happened.